all of us, quote unquote, healthy or not, and I kind of put that in quotations for a reason, which we can come back to, we are all living with cancer. All of us have cancer cells in our body. And it's only when the balance goes off kilter, when something in our terrain and something in our inner garden is out of balance, that the cancer picks up momentum and it sort of takes center stage versus our ability to be healthy and thriving.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey guys, I'm Hilda Labrada Gore, and this is episode 191. Our guest today is Dr. Nasha Winters. Nasha is a global healthcare authority in integrative cancer research, and she consults with physicians around the world. She bridges ancient therapies with advancements in modern science. She is also the co-author of the Metabolic Approach to Cancer. Today, Nasha helps us understand how to best cultivate health in a world where cancer is on the rise. Nasha herself was diagnosed with terminal cancer at the age of 19. She tells us that story along with valuable insights for how cancer operates, what we can do about it, and how we can best take charge of our own health. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation, and I'm also excited to tell you that Nasha will be at our Wise Traditions Conference this November in Dallas. Before we get into it, I want to let you know that we want your voice on this show. We've made it super easy for it to happen, too. Go to our website's podcast page in the About the Podcast and Our Host section, and you'll see a program called SpeakPipe with a little red button. You just press record and tell us in 2 minutes or less what this show has meant to you, and then press send. We'll take it from there and may include your recording, your story, as part of a special episode coming in the weeks ahead. We're doing all of this to celebrate the 2 million download benchmark. We couldn't have made it without you, so thank you so much for listening. And now, we want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Vintage Tradition. Just in time for chapped, sunburned lip season, Vintage Tradition has come out with 4 great flavors of their tallow balm that you know and love in a convenient tube: citrus shine, peppermint stick, vanilla bean, and totally unscented. Protect your lips naturally at vintagetradition.com. And for a limited time, get 10% off your entire order with coupon code PODCAST10. And Ancestral Supplements. Intestines with Tripe by Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. New Zealand-sourced, nose-to-tail organ meats and bone marrow in convenient gelatin capsules. Our family is really hooked on these supplements based on the ancient wisdom of like supports like. Order yours today at ancestralsupplements.com. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Nasha.
Wow, thank you. I'm very excited about being here. I've been following your podcasts as well as the conference and the journal for many, many years.
Oh, well, I'm so glad. I'm glad to hear that. And listen, we really wanted to have you on because you have tremendous information that's going to be very valuable for our listeners, and it all started with your own personal battle with cancer. Can you tell us that story?
Sure. And, as we were saying before we started the recording, most folks who get sort of fired up or passionate about a career choice or a life or a purpose, it's because of a personal experience. And I'm no different than anybody else with regards to that. And I really started out in this world. I wish we'd had a Weston A. Price Foundation, Wise Traditions understanding back at that time, because I had a lot of health issues from the get-go. Could not tolerate any of the formulas. My mom didn't have any breast milk. It was also not a time and a place when people were hip to breastfeeding back in 1971. And so it's just all of these components that just led to sort of an accumulation of one sort of damaging effect on my body to another. So loads and loads of digestive issues, loads and loads of medications to help those digestive issues, even as an infant and little girl. And then an addition of antibiotics and other things that By the time I became a pubescent teenager, I had endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, severe cystic acne, constant IBS patterns, loads and loads and loads of joint issues, which we later found out was rheumatoid arthritis. Lots of food allergies, which I later found out I had celiac. So these we didn't know what we know today. We didn't explore the way we do today. But lo and behold, one insult after another to my terrain led to a diagnosis of terminal ovarian cancer.
Oh, wait. Did you just say terminal? Terminal ovarian cancer.
Or end stage. So I was rushed to the ER, basically in a cardiovascular event where the buildup of fluid in my abdomen from the cancer and the extreme metabolic wasting, the cachexia, the massive malnourishment to my body shut down my kidneys, and my electrolytes were really off kilter. So I was having a lot of cardiovascular and breathing issues. And that's when they finally realized that this was not a histrionic teenager, that this was not a woman who was dealing with, a PID. They kept thinking I had pelvic inflammatory disease or ectopic pregnancy, or just it was an extension of my endometriosis or my IBS. It just kept getting sort of ignored and negated, despite the fact I'd been in the ER at least once a month for the whole year prior. And again, just one more medication after another thrown at it, from antibiotics to pain meds to anxiolytics, you name it. And they just backfired because, again, in the future, I learned that I have a lot of epigenetic hiccups that make me respond very poorly to medications. So that's where it was this kind of a shock. I knew something was wrong, but no one just shy of their 20th birthday is expecting to hear them tell you, you are dying of cancer, you're so sick, we can't even offer you standard of care therapy. And our recommendation is basically what was in essence at that time hospice.
Oh my gosh, Nasha.
Yeah.
This is
crazy.
So crazy. And so what did you do? What did your family do?
Well, this is like, this could be an entire story in itself, and someday a book probably. But I actually had to really leave my family of origin for a period of time. I had to walk away from a lot of people and things in my life that were very toxic and very traumatic for me, which is also what led to this diagnosis. So if people aren't familiar with things like the ACE score, adverse childhood events, or have not been around addictive, toxic, abusive environments, then, that might be a good place to start to research to understand the absolute implications on one's immune function and livelihood and overall well-being. So somehow within my knowledge, when you're given no options, you kind of get pretty resourceful on your own. and being told that, my first reaction was actually one of anger. Anger at not being heard for well over a year, anger at why me, anger at being, kind of just starting my life and actually physically leaving an environment to go off to college that I thought I was doing something good for myself. And it's sort of like, no matter where you go, there you are. So all my baggage came with me. And it pushed me to go to the library immediately. I've always been a self-starter, self-learner, life learner. And I actually had a book sort of jump off the shelf at me. This, kind of crazy, gal from Wichita, Kansas, in Durango, Colorado now for college. The book that jumped off the shelf at me was Deepak Chopra's Quantum Healing, which was a very new book at that time in 1991. And the concepts in that book were, of course, completely new, especially to, this kind of farm girl, So it was such a moment that I sat down in the library on the floor and literally read the book in 2 hours. I'm a voracious reader, typer, speed reader. So that's not unusual for me to do such things. But it was that concept of a paradigm shift happened in an instant. I knew that every single thing I'd ever thought, believed, felt, experienced, ate, lived had to be changed in an instant in order for me to survive.
Wow. What a profound moment. And so probably as you were reading that book, your eyes were open to new possibilities of healing and hope.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's the whole concept of that book, was this concept of a quantum shift, an immediate quantum paradigm shift. And I believe that I was just ripe. Sometimes, again, as I said, when you have no options and when you feel completely just like there is no other way, that was for me the wake-up call. That was the catalyst. That was the pilot light getting relit. And it stimulated what has now been a nearly 28-year journey of learning everything I can about the power of healing, about the power of belief, about the power of bringing all appropriate tools together, be it diet, lifestyle, pharmaceuticals, surgery, whatever it takes to bring that person back to balance. And I'm still on that journey. This isn't done for me. I personally don't believe in the concept of cure. And I also don't believe in the concept of being a survivor. I'm a thriver. And I'm someone who has found balance within my body and know how to pay attention to help me hear when I'm out of balance to help gently bring it back into the realm of balance.
Do you think that's one of the best ways to approach cancer?
I think, and I don't know if that's the best way, but I think it's a unique way that seems to really impact the tens of thousands of patients I've had the absolute privilege and joy of sort of consulting and supporting through this diagnosis, through this process. I think Western medicine sort of gives us this ideology or this belief system that there is access to a cure, and yet they still don't even quite understand the process of cancer to understand that all of us, quote unquote, healthy or not, I kind of put that in quotations for a reason, which we can come back to. We are all living with cancer. All of us have cancer cells in our body. And it's only when the balance goes off kilter, when something in our terrain and something in our inner garden is out of balance, that the cancer picks up momentum and it sort of takes center stage versus our ability to be healthy and thriving.
Can you unpack that a little bit for us in terms of how we all have cancer? Is cancer when the cells go wild is kind of what I heard, or they kind of go rogue?
That's a great way to put it, because we all have cancer cells in us, but for the most part, they are or should be dormant. And they're opportunistic, let's put it that way, that they are waiting for the right signals, the right kind of collection of things that I dig into in the book about what goes into our mitochondrial bucket, but we'll go to that here in a moment. But ultimately, all those cells are waiting for and listening for cues from our physiology, from our biochemistry, from our thoughts, which impact our biology, our chemistry, our physiology, as well as the toxicants that we are exposed to on a day-to-day basis, just living on planet Earth today, as well as the people you even choose to be around. We are energetic beings. And when you're around another, you're also feeling their trauma, their stuff. And so it's very challenging to separate things out into a single cause or a single cure, which has been the MO of cancer treatment for at least the last 70 years. And it's what's gotten us in trouble and not really changed our outcomes very much. So we still have almost the same level of survival rates. We haven't really changed the dial on that knob. And we're increasingly having higher and higher diagnoses of cancer. And a lot of people will say that's just thanks to better technologies for screening. But I actually don't personally believe that that's entirely true. Not necessarily to say that it isn't somewhat, that there's some element of truth to it. But we definitely are seeing worldwide rates of cancer, 1 in 2 men, 1 in 2.4 women in the United States expected to have this disease in their lifetime. The fastest growing rates of cancer today are in folks under the age of 35, and that is colorectal cancer and brain cancer. And that was a time when we used to think of cancer just as a disease of the elderly, of the aging process. And so when you look at things like that, there's a lot of things that have changed in a short period of time on the planet today. And that's where I get fired up about the work that you do, your organization does, and what you're sharing is that we've really gotten away from the natural rhythm and balance of the globe and our relationship to it.
Does anybody ever say, oh my gosh, these things you're saying, Nasha, are so woo-woo. You read that, quantum health book too. You let it go too deep and too far. You know what I mean?
Yep. Oh, definitely. I get put into the woo-woo camp all of the time. And yet, ultimately, I'm a scientist first. I'm such a geek. I read probably 1,000 research articles a week. I eat this stuff for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. My passion is in the study of things like epigenetics, targeted, molecular markers, molecular profiles. The way I actually work with patients is through extreme testing. So I have a mantra: test, assess, address, don't guess. So I don't, throw these ideas out there lightly. And the studies at the time that book came out, Quantum Healing, there were other people that were also sort of brewing in their ideologies that I ran across at that time. People like Dr. Candace Pert, a PhD, Dr. Bruce Lipton, also a PhD. These were researchers and clinicians that were starting to recognize in laboratory environments, later put into human clinical trials, that our thoughts do in fact change our epigenetic expression, change our physiology, change our laboratory, change our immunoglobulin status. So we started, talking back actually as early as the 1970s in a concept known as psychoneuroimmunology. And so at the time of my diagnosis, I was pre-med, an undergrad. I was always interested in the sciences. I was always interested in medicine. And instead of getting a biology chemistry degree, this diagnosis shot me into a trajectory to get a major in psychology with a minor in biology, because of what I knew was happening from a trauma standpoint, from my own personal life experience. So it was sort of that concept of healer, heal thyself that I wanted to, like you said, unpack that a little bit more. And the deeper I dove into the concept of how much our thoughts and traumas and experiences can impact our overall health and vitality, the more on fire I got. And I was able to sort of create my own degree of a psychoneuroimmunology degree, the way I piecemealed together the coursework to help me really keep digging deeper while getting my credits at the same time. And that really fell nicely into moving on into going into naturopathic medicine versus conventional standard of care medicine, because at that time, what I was interested in wasn't really taken up in conventional standard of care medical field nor biology. And I wasn't interested in becoming a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So that's where it was so cool to then stumble upon in the early 90s naturopathic medicine, which gave me an environment in which to dig a little bit deeper in all of these concepts.
So you were saying the word environment, and it reminds me of what you said earlier, that these cancer cells are opportunistic and looking for the right signal or environment in which to go rogue or wild, as I was saying. So what are the conditions that make them take that opportunity?
Here's what's so cool is I think of the body as a bucket, and the main label that is placed on that bucket is our mitochondria. So just a super quick reminder, we all learned about the mitochondria probably in a 6th grade biology class as being the mighty mitochondria and the little factory within each of our cells that creates the energy necessary for life, which is ATP. Very basic. We all kind of learned that and said, cool, groovy, move on. And then we really haven't revisited it for the last 40 years or so. There are more and more studies and more textbooks and more information and sort of credence given to this little mighty mitochondria, this little like component of a cell that we've sort of played lightly about for many, many years, which is the fact that it is what takes in all the information from inside and outside of us. And we'll go into that here in a bit more detail, but basically it takes in food, water, light, air, soil, thoughts, stressors, toxicants. It takes all of that through and filters it through its cell membrane and runs it through or tries to process it to run it through a particular cycle within that cell, the Krebs cycle, which is what creates our ATP, our energy. And basically, when it's functioning well, efficiently, effectively, when it can go back and forth easily between burning carbohydrates and burning fat, for instance, and when it's not being clogged up by things like toxicant exposures from our world around us, our environment, then it is efficient and effective in making ATP and making energy, but it's also staying healthy in its number, in its quantity in the body, in the tissues. So why this is important to give you a little backdrop to the mitochondrial function is when we move that conversation into disease state processes. Okay. We know that when our mitochondria are sick, when they're inefficient, and when they're lacking in their number and their vitality, we are more prone to DNA damage. We are more prone to metabolic diseases. We are more prone to oxidative stress and inflammation. And those cells, they die off, they become rogue, they become, sick, and they don't die. And here's why. The mitochondria are 100% in charge of what's a process called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So once cells have cycled through and done their job, they basically go into early retirement, being gobbled up, and they die off, and they get to have then more new healthy cells come on board. With cancer, that doesn't happen. You end up with basically an immortal, constantly replicating, and each time it turns over a new, life cycle, it gets sicker and sicker as it replicates, and it basically refuses to die. That is under the impulse and the support for it to die off when it needs to of healthy mitochondrial function.
I was trying to think of a word picture to go with this. It's like the supervisor at the factory is sleeping on the job. So all the little factory workers that aren't the best workers are kind of taking over the factory and making it malfunction.
Totally. That's actually a really excellent analogy, and it's very visual, and you can kind of see that. Like, it's sort of when the parents go away for vacation and the kids have a huge party at the house and trash the place. And they love their parents and they love their house, but they're still like rogue teenagers that just have to do this without regard to the whole organism. And that's ultimately what cancer cells do, is they basically say, we've gone rogue, we're taking over, we're not listening to you anymore. We are going to reproduce, replicate our cells over and over without regard to the fact that eventually we will starve the host and all die. That's ultimately what the final moments of cancer can come down to. And that's really scary because, those cells, you'd think they'd have their own sort of built-in, hey, I want to live forever, but they do until the host is gone. And so they don't really understand long-term visioning, sort of how we treat our planet today.
Coming up, Nasha explains what factors contribute to getting and keeping the mitochondria healthy.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Chelsea Green Publishing. Chelsea Green Publishing is recognized as a leading publisher of books about organic farming and gardening, homesteading, local food, restorative living, and diet-focused integrative health. Some recent and best-selling health titles include Vaccines, Autoimmunity, and the Changing Nature of Childhood Illness by Dr. Thomas Cowan, The Alzheimer's Antidote by Amy Berger, Nutrition in Crisis by Richard Feynman, and The Metabolic Approach to Cancer by Dr. Nasha Winters and Jess Higgins-Kelly. Go to chelseagreen.com and enter code WISE19 at checkout for 20% off your next print book purchase. And be sure to sign up for the newsletter and stay up to date on new releases and audiobooks. And Grass-Fed Intestines with Tripe by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements offer New Zealand-sourced, nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and intestines with tripe in convenient gelatin capsules. According to the great John Fire Lame Deer, the eating of guts evolved into a contest. Quote, "In the old days, we used to eat the guts of the buffalo, making a contest of it. Two fellows getting hold of a long piece of intestines from opposite ends started chewing toward the middle, seeing who could get there first. That's eating. Those buffalo guts full of half-fermented, half-digested grass and herbs, you didn't need any pills and vitamins when you swallowed those." End quote. Intestines, stomach tripe, and other gelatinous parts provided concentrated amounts of connective tissue, undenatured collagen, probiotics, and other gut-specific proteins that are now absent from the modern diet. Visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. So I have the picture now. So what I'm thinking is we need to wake up the supervisors, the mitochondria. We need to get them really healthy and functioning efficiently and back in their roles so that any little cell that does go rogue can be put back in its place and kind of step back into line, because that's more critical than we may have realized.
Yes, I think that's a very good point, is that it's more critical than we ever realized. And now we're starting to, for the last 70 or so years, we've put all of our energy into the concept of somatic cause of cancer, which is a genetic sort of stuck in a rut, process that is the way we have thought about and treated cancer for a very long period of time. And yet what the evolving information in scientific literature is finding, that's sort of resurrecting some old concepts from the 1920s and actually before that as well, to today, is that we need to look beyond the gene. We need to back up and look at the big picture in which that gene is swimming in. What swimming pool, what bucket is that gene hanging out in? Because there's some really cool studies that have been replicated many times called these nuclear transfer studies. Basically, if you take the genetic material of a healthy cell and you put it into the jelly material of a cancer cell, you can turn that genetic material into cancer. And if you take the genetic material of a cancer cell and you put it into the cytoplasma or jelly material, sort of the rest of the bucket, the terrain, the swimming pool of that healthy cell, you will turn that genetic material back into healthy material.
So you want that healthy swimming pool, basically.
You want the healthy swimming pool. Basically, that's exactly it. It doesn't matter what the genetic brain is telling you. It's what the swimming pool that genetic brain is swimming in.
Okay, so this is a perfect moment to transition to application for each of us. So I've seen in your book, you mention nutrition, lifestyle, and some metabolic piece. I can imagine nutrition and lifestyle is very much in line with what we suggest at the Weston Price Foundation. But can you elaborate on the metabolic approach to cancer?
So there are about 10 different contributing factors I've personally found over 25 years of doing this for myself and tens of thousands of others that contribute to the health or vitality of that mitochondria. Okay. That includes things like our epigenetics. So the deck of cards we were dealt in this lifetime that came from previous generations. But the cool thing about epigenetics is that it's above the gene, meaning our diet and lifestyle choices impact the way it expresses. So that little nugget drop goes into the bucket. The next thing that impacts that bucket is our glycemic index, our metabolic process being basically the fuel from our food that goes into that bucket. And what's happened, and Weston Price nails this in their work, is that we've really gone up until the industrial food revolution. We were all low carb, okay? We call it kind of low carb today, but we ate a diet that was far less in processed foods and, well, no processed foods prior to 1850. And far less low carbohydrate at a time when we put out a lot more physical energy to grow our food, to find our food, to prepare our food than we do today, where we can simply walk into a supermarket 24/7 and graze on the outer aisles on all of the Arthur Daniel Midland, food choices that we have to fuel us. And so we basically have gone from 5 pounds of sugar per person per year before 1850 to over 175 pounds of sugar per person per year as of a study in 2014. So we have changed this sort of metabolic hybrid engine that we used to be, where our bodies could easily go back and forth between burning sugar or fat for fuel for that mitochondria to function. But instead, what we've done is we've basically put a brick on the accelerator pedal of the car and we just stay in sugar burning, which browns us, oxidizes us, creates these glycosylated end products, creates inflammation, creates a very fermented toxic soup. Now, not good ferments like the Weston Price, but more like a stagnant pond that's kind of gotten mucky and a weird funkiness. That's how we've lived today. So sugar is such a shift in our human evolution in the last 150 years that it is one of the big contributors to this bucket. And then the other kind of 8 big players are things like our microbiome, which of course is all the rage, our soil inside versus our soil outside and how they relate, our toxicant exposures. We have over 60,000 new chemicals brought to the market since the 1960s, of which less than 200 have been properly tested. We have
Wait, can you repeat that stat? That's mind-boggling.
Right, staggering, correct? So we have thousands, tens of thousands, 60 to 80,000 new products, new chemicals have been brought to our lives, to, quote, living better through chemistry per the old adage. And yet less than 200 of them have been thoughtfully, carefully vetted and researched for their safety. And so we're all just kind of a living experiment today with the types of toxicants we've introduced to the planet. And even people like IARC, which is a third-party research in cancer-related issues, have been able to show that even some of the innocuous chemicals we've brought on board, things that were theoretically benign, once we put them all into a big soup with a lot of other benign chemicals, guess what? We create a very toxic, carcinogenic, endocrine-disrupting soup. So even the quote-unquote healthy, just fine for you chemicals, when we place them all into a big heap, it creates problems. That's staggering.
It's very staggering. And I actually want to dive into more about the solutions, but we're actually running out of time, Nasha. So I think what we need to do is I'm going to ask you the question I often pose at the end here to give our listeners encouragement and hope. And then I think we're going to have to do a part 2 to continue this conversation, because you've brought a lot to the table. And I know many, many people are trying to find a new way to treat the cancer and even to avoid getting it in the first place. So the question I often pose at the end here is rather broad, but if the listener could do one thing to improve their health, or to improve that swimming pool or bucket that their cells are swimming around in, what would you recommend that they do, Nasha?
Well, this is not a simple task, but it's an important task. And that task would be to basically take inventory of everything you put on, in, and around your body. So a quick example of that would be open up your medicine cabinet. Look at what's in there. That Tylenol that you can easily get over the counter is one of the most toxic pollutants and killers of our mitochondrial function, as an example. Or look under your kitchen sink. Do you have a ton of commercial grade cleaning products, many of which are well known now to be carcinogenic, or at the very least endocrine disrupting? And what you put on your body, your skin. Women on average put over 20 different compounds on their skin before they even get out the bathroom door in the morning. That's just to get started with shampoos and body care products. You must start to take a better look at that through things like EWG.org, which is the environmental working group. Under their, they've got like a body product section that grades your all your body care products from an A to an F, and you want to stay in the A range, preferably don't go below a B average on these things, because your skin is the largest organ of absorption as well as elimination, and the largest organ of our body. And so it is taking it. It's like having a million mouths on your skin surface that are just gobbling up those chemicals. So if you start to take inventory, start to do a little homework about what you're putting in, on, around your body, you will start to mitigate and lower a lot of your risk factors that contribute to an ailing mitochondria and therefore chronic illness prevention.
Oh, Nasha, that is great advice. And we will put links in the show notes so people can find the resources you've mentioned in this podcast, some of the studies you've mentioned, and even that EWG, the Environmental Working Group website, so that people can move forward in this plan to protect and shore up their body's health. So I look forward to conversation 2 in just a little while. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. What an honor.
For more on Nasha and the metabolic approach to cancer, visit her website, www.drnasha.com. And you can find me on Instagram at Holistic Hilda. For the show notes for this and every episode of the Wise Traditions podcast, go to our website, westinaprice.org. And that's it. Thanks, everybody, and see you next time.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit WestonAPrice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.